if we're talking about inclusive practice. And we were getting the chance to look at the broader context, the evidence base around it, some lived experiences on the topic as well, and also perhaps focusing a bit on some methods and some useful methods for working with fathers. But we've sort of come mob-handed today, haven't we, Rich? We've got a good group of people.
Brilliant group,
I think. Speak to this topic in amazing, imaginative, erudite ways.
Danny and Mike are kind of leading a bit of a kind of revolution, I would say, in the kind of trauma-informed world. And they're from Manchester, and they're really sparking a lot of energy and bringing people along this journey with them. And I do think that they've got a very unique and an incredible voice. They are joining us. We've kind of from a conference that's being run in Bristol. So we've kind of borrowed them, and in the midst of them already delivering a day's conference. And so hopefully the signal on their end is going to hold up, but we're just going to have to, yeah.
Yeah, we're here.
Right. We can see and hear you. Do you want to kick us off then and start the topic on, you know, what you're up to, your experiences, how social workers can work with dads?
Let me go around this. Right, I'm going to go around this corner. Right, sorry, because it's like really noisy. I'm just trying to get some kind of soundproofing. So my name's Danny. I'm one half of Lads Like Us, and we've got a lot of lived experience, which includes like sort of failures from services, particularly social workers, particularly teachers, particularly the police and stuff. And what we found, we spent a long time shouting and screaming at people like you, basically trying to get people to listen. But because we've done it in an aggressive way, because it's come from a place of anger and unresolved stuff, nobody's wanted to listen to us because they thought we was crazy, and we was crazy at that time. So what we had to do is we had to accept that there was nothing that we could do about what's happened to us, but maybe we could implement some little changes in the future for other kids and other adults who may be involved in systems and stuff, and try and create like sort of a trauma-informed wave. And we came up with, we've written a session called Million Pieces, and it's called A Million Pieces because we won't break into a million pieces, just ask. Our big thing is about professional curiosity and trauma-informed practice, and asking why, not being afraid to ask why. Why is someone behaving the way they're behaving? A lot of the time, our big thing is the entry room for a lot of our behaviour was trauma, and undealt with trauma, and that created our identity. And going on to like sort of the father's thing for us, which sits into identity, and like sort of, you know, role models we may have had when we was growing up. So my role model, because my dad wasn't about, and because my mum wasn't about and stuff, like I looked at the different people on our estate, you know, people who be like him. That's what a man is supposed to be. And I took little parts of identity from all these different persons, all these different people, and it turned me into one. Sorry, I'm not going to swear, one effed up person who didn't know who the hell they was. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of, for me, it's about when you're working with like sort of men like understand us, getting to understand where we've come from. You know, I didn't wake up one morning and think I want to be flipping, burgling, thieving, drug. You know, it took from months old, and it took till I was 33 to someone to sit me down and say, Daniel, have you experienced any kind of trauma when you was younger? Where was your mum? Where was your dad? How was things when you was growing up? It took till I was 33 for someone to ask that question. You know, don't be like those other professionals that flipping, like sort of let us down. Exercise professional curiosity, ask those questions. And, you know, when like, you know, we've had like sort of social services involved in like sort of our life as adults with our kids and stuff. You know, the main reason being my daughter's mum died of cancer, basically. Social services like sort of got involved, and because she went off the rails and what have you. And if I think of their experience of trying to understand me, was like, for me, it came across like sort of quite judgy, if I'm totally honest with you. They asked me to sit, they sat me down and they wanted to go through my history from like sort of birth to like sort of present day. And, you know, there was no, you know, I've had to go in deep about, you know, sexual abuse and rape and all that stuff that happened to me as a kid and as a teenager. Getting raped by like sort of a gang member and caught up in selling drugs and stuff. And there was no like sort of empathy shown when those questions were asked. And I was kind of just like sort of, they undug all this flipping stuff and kind of just left me to it, basically. You know, and it's like, you know, Mike's got in there because it's too flipping noisy, basically. But, you know, he's had questioned about his like sort of his parenting style by social services because his little daughter's waiting to be diagnosed with autism and stuff. So they've been questioning Mike's parenting style as a father, and you know, has that impacted your parenting and stuff? And you know, my parenting style's flipping overcompensating. If I'm totally honest with you, to like sort of make sure my son has everything, like sort of materially. He's got all the stuff that I've got when I didn't have a kid, and I go way over the top with that. But I also go way over the top with love. You know what I mean? Where it's like, he wants cuddles off me all the time, all that kind of stuff. And I've only learned how to be, or part of the reason I've learned how to be a parent and like sort of a better dad and stuff is by sort of, I don't like the term, but kind of sort of listening and hearing like sort of normal people who haven't been through shit that I've been through. You know what I mean? And learning how they did it, then coming to the understanding that, hang on a minute, you've probably had traumatic events in your life, and how have you made it this far in life without ending up in prison like I did and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's about just treating people as flipping human beings, really, when you're flipping trying to work with them and ask these questions and thinking about, you know, what support might be in place for them as well, because obviously it's not easy being a dad. It's one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my flipping life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry, Richard, I'm going off on one a bit there, but
no, that's spot on. And yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying about how nobody up until you're in your kind of mid-30s took notice of what your experiences had been and why you were behaving and presenting the way that you were, and exploring and understanding who, you know, what traumas and difficulties have you been through, just kind of judging you at face value, essentially.
Yeah. You know, and like sort of, you know, I'm kind of sort of rightly so. When I was doing what I was doing, I was the kind of person that you'd have flipping crossed over if you'd have seen coming down the street, because I was walking down the street up to what I was up to with my hood up, which had a built-in fucking balaclava. You know what I mean? Yeah, you'd have crossed over, but what that coat was my shield. It was my protective thing, because I was a scared little boy inside. But that's no good when I'm a grown man running about and with the decision-making of a flipping 15-year-old boy and the emotions of a 15-year-old boy. You know what I mean? We need to, you know, like I say, it took till I was past 33 to someone to tell me what emotional intelligence was. It took till that age for somebody to sit me down with a sheet, yeah, with a smiley face, a happy face, a frustrated face, an angry face, and explain to me what all these feelings were, because I didn't know this stuff. You know what I mean? So, you know, don't assume that flipping people know all this stuff, because we flipping don't.
Brilliant. Okay, Danny, I'm very mindful of your other commitment at the conference.
I'm in the middle of a conference. I've just hid behind a screen to talk to you.
I'm super grateful for you joining us, and I hope that the rest of your day goes well. Excellent. So hopefully everybody was able to get the gist of that. It kind of, from my end, the connectivity was a little bit weak in the middle, but I managed to pick up most of it. And I really appreciate what he was saying about how he had this shield of invulnerability. It's like there's a coat of armor, but actually beneath that is a kind of little scared boy, and it takes courage to kind of own that, especially when you're under a stressful situation, when you have social workers involved.
Yeah, I think it's really important. It's a bit of a gratuitous metaphor, but it's important that we tune into that lived experience, isn't it? Even when it's quite sort of hard to hear literally in that case, but it's really important to start with that. Yeah.
So we're going to now bring in Georgia Phillip, who has really done some remarkable research around working with dads. In my opinion, some of the most impressive research that's been done on working with dads, in terms of the insights that it's generated, but also some of the practical implications of the work that she's done. And so I'm just going to try and get the slides up.
Okay. Thanks, Richard.
I'll hand over to you, Georgia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much for those kind words. That's much appreciated. And hello, everyone. Some of the names I know, others not so, but I'm really glad to be here. So I've got 10 minutes, which is obviously going to be a bit of a pretty brief run through, but really, if anyone is interested, you're always welcome to drop me an email if you want to hear more, or for me to share more sort of written stuff based on our research. But I'm going to talk briefly today about the most recent study that we did, which was the first English study, first UK study really, that looked at fathers who have experienced repeat care proceedings. So I chose that because there's some, I hope, valuable insights there. Particularly around a group of fathers who maybe are the most marginalised, and as the clue is in the project title, there are up against a whole bunch of things. Okay, so that study was funded by the Nuffield Foundation. You can see all the kind of, the university partners that was between us at the University of East Anglia down in Norwich and then Lancaster University. So we worked together as a project team to do this work. What else can I tell you briefly? Yeah, so it was a 2-year study, and it had two sort of main, well, three main bits to it. One, there was a sort of big picture stuff where we were able to look at, we had permission from CAFCAS to look at all of the court records over a 9-year period, so all of the cases of care proceedings, and for the first time we could look at how many fathers appear in those care proceedings, and then from that how many dads appear in repeat care proceedings, so they appear again. So again, first time that's been done. We did a brief sort of survey of dads involved in care proceedings to try and get a sense of kind of life circumstances and characteristics of those dads. And then we did an in-depth over time study with a smaller group of 26 dads who'd have that lived experience of repeat loss of children or repeat going through care proceedings. So sort of three main bits to it. I'm going to share, so the slide you're looking at now, I'm just going to share sort of 3 bits of information, if you like, from that big picture stuff that I think you might find interesting. And then from that, I'm going to move on to more of the kind of in-depth, some of the in-depth lived experience type stuff, particularly around the emotional effect of having to go through care proceedings, and for some of those dads to have to lose a child to care. So let's have a look at a couple of the key points from that court data. So again, it was the first time looking at how many dads there are in care proceedings over that time period, and you can see there's a significant number that you're able to sort of see in those case records. And then we were looking at about just over 9.5 dads who'd been through repeat care proceedings. So again, a group of dads who are going to have experienced some really threatening, difficult, painful stuff. There was sort of two findings that I think you might find interesting. One is that while there were cases of care proceedings where there was no dad known, no one recorded, no one knew who he wasn't party, whatever. But nonetheless, in 80% of those cases of care proceedings, the dad was known and named as a party to those proceedings. So we can't simply say that dads are not there, we don't know who they are. For me, it tells us there's work to do, both with that 20% of the dads who aren't recorded and we know nothing about, but also to work much better and much more fairly and fully with that 80% of dads who are known at least to somebody and who are part of, at least on the face of it, part of those care proceedings, part of that decision making. The other important sort of big picture finding that I think is interesting and maybe challenges particularly social workers and other professionals' assumptions that they sometimes make about dads is that for those dads that had been through repeat care proceedings, so appearing in more than one case, out of those dads who returned to the court, 3/4 of them, so 3 out of 4, came back with the same partner. So this was not, you know, these were couples. Sometimes they'd split up, got back together, whatever. But nonetheless, there was this real pattern for fathers going through repeat proceedings, that they are coming back with the same mum. So it's about working with couples as well as working with dads, and appreciating, you know, the problems, relationship, you know, emotional, you know, issues that affect couples as part of our work with dads. Okay, that's, again, I'm going to race through because I've got 10 minutes. I don't want to cut into anyone else's time. So then I'm going to share with you a few findings from the in-depth over time. When I say in-depth over time, that's because we, you know, we did kind of long interviews with this group of dads, but we also kept in touch with them over a year by text message, by phone calls every month, and then another interview at the end. So we built these really important, really rich pictures of these dads' lives, their own life histories, their childhood histories, their relationships, their housing, their work, their health, you know, all of it. It's important, you know, insightful stuff that, again, had perhaps not been there previously, particularly for this group of fathers. So let me say a couple of things about relationships. So yes, for those, you know, again, it's a small study. You know, have to be careful how we generalize about this, but it gives us something to think about at least. So for these dads who had experienced repeat care proceedings, you know, there was a lot of turmoil in their early life relationships. There was harm. There was you know, abusive experiences, and that was often kind of added to by other types of loss or instability or disruption of relationships, or of kind of material circumstances. So, you know, not having enough money, moving around a lot, being estranged, you know, losing a parent through bereavement, divorce, separation, all of this stuff. So that early life, a relationship life, if you like, was notable. Then we come to that, you know, the middle point there, that kind of fits with the big picture finding that I shared with you before. So for this group of fathers as well, in terms of their couple relationships, their partnerships, you know, over a third of those dads, they fitted that pattern. They were in, you know, they were in long-standing, or what we called enduring relationships. Again, those relationships were not easy. Some of them were harmful or problematic for both partners, but nonetheless, it was notable that there were couples who'd been through repeat episodes of child protection and care proceedings together, and yet, as the quote at the bottom there illustrates, that was fair, you know, that was very often not recognized, or almost deliberately kind of worked against when it came to encounters with professionals. So again, those enduring relationships were often really difficult, as Mike, I think, was describing, you know, just knowing about how to do relationships in a safe, you know, in a safe way, how to manage emotions. So those enduring relationships were often part of what escalated professional concerns, or it made change harder in their lives. But nonetheless, that, you know, they were enduring these relationships, and yet no one was really engaging with that. Okay, next one. It's like a sprint. Okay, also wanted to just share with you another in-depth finding from the in-depth over time study, which was just where we tried to really dig down into the emotional impact of going through care proceedings and repeat care proceedings, going through, you know, the loss of children, and we focused on particular painful, or if you like, threatening emotions, things like grief, shame, guilt, loss, you know, this stuff. Again, you've got a quote there on the front of the slide there from one of the dads. Again, what we find, I think, is that they're, you know, the experiences of these dads, as you might expect, they're comparable with experiences of mothers who've been through care proceedings. But what I would want to get you to think about is those points of gender difference in terms of how pain might be expressed, how it's defended against by fathers, and where that, you know, again, I think that speaks to some of the things that Mike was saying. You know, so the different ways maybe in which how the dads tried to defend against threatening, painful emotions, but also importantly how those emotions were interpreted and therefore responded to by professionals. I think that's a really important thing to think about. A couple of sort of, you know, patterns or, you know, strategies, if you like, neither of which worked well for the dads, and they knew that. That I'm listing on here. For some dads, there was this kind of, you know, incremental sort of gradual withdrawal, shutdown. Just don't go there. I'm not going to even think about it. I'm going to block it out or distract myself, you know, in some other means. But that they knew, and they could speak about how damaging that had been to their own mental health, to other relationships, anyone that tried to get close to them, but also damaging to their relationship with professionals. So professionals might say, well, he doesn't care, you know, or he's disengaged. He obviously doesn't care. Other dads, you know, were very bound up with fighting, you know, and in a way that makes sense. You know, if your moral and paternal identity, if your identity as a good man, as a good dad is threatened, one response might be, I'm going to fight that. I'm going to fight for my kids, even if, you know, at some point in the future they're going to say to me, Dad, what did you do? Did you fight for me? Whatever. Again, it doesn't play well. Some of those dads were very quickly seen as too difficult to work with, too antagonistic. They're just a pain. They're just always, you know, in your face. But I think it's about understanding what is behind that, and where those strategies come from, and what alternative strategies, you know, fathers might need to kind of just deal with this stuff. Okay, next one. Okay, these are just some quotes, really, just to kind of give you a flavour. So, you know, you've got people in the room better than me that can talk about lived experience, but these quotes maybe reflect some of the experiences that the dads in this study. So Jonathan there, you know, for him, it was this whole thing about, can you ever move on from your past? Are you always going to be judged by your past? Where does the past belong? You know, at what point is someone gonna give you the chance? I think Keith's quote, for me, the really powerful bit about there is the way he has to struggle to even think of the word help, because he doesn't really know what that is or what that looks like. Michael there speaking about the impact of shame, you know, that he was an example of a dad that was living an almost reclusive life. He was so scared of being exposed and shamed by, you know, almost anyone that he felt he might come across. His self-esteem, his experience of depression was so powerful there. Then, excuse the language on that bottom one, Danny, you know, this was part of his sort of fighting, kind of fronting up, just, you know, just do one, you know, he can't deal with it, and was kind of almost playing up to, as he said, that, you know, he felt that, you know, people talked to him like a piece of crap and didn't give him a chance. So his response was, you know, right, F you, I'm out of here. Again, even he, you know, as a young man, he had a diagnosis of ADHD, various things, you know, he really struggled to articulate his emotions, but he knew that that behavior didn't play well for him, but he was at a loss as to what else to do. Okay, maybe I don't need to, you know, I think that's probably enough. Those, I just tried to end with some issues maybe that we could reflect on in this session or later, just maybe what are the kind of barriers to relationship building, given that a lot of you know, a lot of what's up for discussion here is how do we take a more relational approach, a more humane, a more strengths-based, trauma-informed, whichever one of those prevailing, you know, potentially really constructive approaches you want to take. We still have to think, fine, but how does that actually work in practice when you're working with dads, yeah, who have experienced you know, painful, threatening things and might not have the emotional resources to move on from that easily. Thanks. Sorry, I hope that wasn't too long.
No, that was brilliant. That was super. I think one of the things I really appreciate about your research and the talk then is how you're revealing some of the underlying complexities of men's presentation, which can just seem quite either aggressive or difficult or quite hard to engage with. And actually beneath the surface for a lot of men is a lot of vulnerability, a lot of sadness, and as you say,
but also, yeah, and also the capacity to reflect. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, the dads in our study, they weren't, you know, they weren't idiots. They were perfectly capable with given that space and opportunity and time, and non-threatening. Obviously, I was a researcher. I wasn't threatening in the way that other professionals might have been, but that ability to be self-reflective about their own behavior and actions, some of which were directly you know, related to why you know, they were facing care proceedings, others less so, but nonetheless, I think it's just that, yeah, that the capacity to be reflective and think about change. Yeah.
Encouraging us to realize that men can be both perpetrators of harm but also being victims of substantial harm throughout their whole lives. So it's like, how can we hold both of those points of view in mind when we're working with some of the dads?
Yeah, and in fact, sorry, if I just say one more thing, as I think there's some useful, you know, that one other thing that fascinates and slightly frustrates is like there is some really skillful work happening out there, sensitive work, you know, for instance with mothers who've experienced repeat care proceedings, but there simply is not. So why is there not the equivalent service response to fathers who are often have the same characteristics or who are up against many of the same issues? So in a way, like the learning is there's some really useful learning that could be applied. So hopefully that's what will happen. Anyway, I'll shut up.
Brilliant. No, thank you. That was excellent.
Yeah, thanks for putting your running shoes on as well, Georgia. We didn't mean you to sprint quite so hard, but we're glad that you could come and contribute that. Lots of people appreciating it in the chat as well, and actually asking whether you'd be able to share those slides or share some more, access your research and look at it afterwards. Yeah, we'll get. I'm sure there's ways that Georgia could share the research with you, and we can get those out over the email. And then we're going to have some time for conversation before we finish up at 1 o'clock. So there'll be a chance to circle back to those that rich discussion and that research. And we've got Kevin and Jordelle joining us now. Two familiar faces to me. I mean, these webinars are certainly not about Rich and I claiming expertise in these areas. They're rather a chance to get together and initiate some conversations with people that we know that have got significant expertise, lived and learned, to bring to these topics. And that's certainly the case with Kevin and Jordelle. They've got lived experience in this area as dads, but also real significant expertise in working in and around services in that legal context as advocates, and also connected to family group conference work as well. And so it's great to have you two on the call. Thanks very much for joining us, and we appreciate it. How are you both?
Good, thanks, Tim.
Good. And I noticed Kev, on the chat there, you said you were responding to Georgia's research, and you said fathers are stripped open
yes,
before services can accept that you want to be involved. Yeah, what quite
yes, just to give you guys
sentence. Yeah.
Tim, I'm just going to do a short background just to help everybody else who don't know who I am. It's great to see familiar faces. So I was a teenage father at the age of 18, and my first impression of social services was a phone call that they're going to investigate and do police checks. So it was never really a good opener for them to introduce themselves. But my son had social services from the beginning until I became a full-time father, single father, when he was just before his 6th birthday. So what I recall, so what I was trying to point out as well when I put that message on the comment is to reflect some of what Mike was saying about having to share a lot about your past.
Oh, Kevin, you've gone on mute.
You're muted.
Yeah.
Apologies. After sharing, some of your past traumas, you are just left, and nobody checks up on you to see how you are doing. So for me, I remember the one thing I really want to share was the first time I was given a voice. It was by a chair who was covering. They'd never been around, they were just covering. And that chair in child protection came up to me and asked me, Kevin, Dad, what do you want? And that was the first ever. And this is when my son was already about 3 years old. And it gave me a voice. This empowered me, it enabled me to be able to speak up. Because some of the plans, when I look back of the way things were happening in child protection, it was very mother focused. and it also, it kind of set her up for failure, because it never looked at the father who was around as a resource on how can we talk to dad and find out what fathers can do more. You know, I can go on, but I'm gonna, you know, try to bounce off Jordelle as well, to allow Jordelle to share some of his experience. But hopefully we will touch on all the key points that we really wanted to do.
So, hi everyone, my name's Jordelle. I have lived experience, professional experience, a little bit of everything, to be honest. What was really good with research Georgia said is that I could just see so many similarities to things I've experienced, families I work with, just issues I get bombarded by daily. And for me, what I find kind of, like the underlying tone with everything is that when you work with services or engage with professionals, the hardest thing is kind of proving yourself. As a man or as a male, you're constantly proving yourself as the valid parent, or proving yourself that you're able to care for the child in the same way that the service feel that mum could care for the child. And that's why I think there's a clear imbalance, or disproportionality in how mum is viewed in the services and opposed to dad. And when I met Kevin, I was going through sagas, let's just say, of my own, which was maybe like 7 years ago. And now 7 years down the line, I like empower fathers now to be heard in the same way. This was not an issue for me before, because I never had issues like in my life with my own dad. I grew up with my mom, I grew up with my dad. I was oblivious until I became a father, and then I was presented with all these issues, and the narrative I had in my mind wasn't the reality, you know? So I've kind of made it like a personal mission to fight case by case and advocate for fathers and advocate for myself, and really push for a change of narrative, push for a change of outcomes, push for some form of direction that's conducive of the family, not just what the professional sees that they think the family should look like. I feel for me that there's not enough time for me to go through some of these stories and experiences and testimonies, because it's just an hour we have today. But I just kind of wanted to share that with everyone, that it's a lot about validity. Like, dads are constantly validifying themselves, even things like domestic violence, where males are accused as a perpetrator. Don't get me wrong, there are many scenarios where guys do kind of domestically abuse women, or they're in a domestically abusive relationship. I just think society sometimes don't see that same, or have the same empathy when the roles are reversed, when the man's actually been a victim of domestic abuse. You know, I've worked with many fathers like this myself. I've even dealt with a case in Luton before where that was like the first case of coercive and controlling behavior, you know. And it's so interesting to see how your personal biases affect your practice, which affects the outcomes for the family. And I just want to change the narrative one family at a time, or one professional at a time. I think that's the only way.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think as I was listening to Jordelle, it kind of brought back some of the memories, you know, of when I was going through pre-proceedings. This is when I had a senior social worker, James, who's on, but I think James may not know this, but while I was going through those pre-proceedings, I was actually going through homelessness as well, before we ended up going into court. So I do recall speaking to social workers about my circumstances, and it was just a discussion, and no support was ever planned or laid about to, you know, to see how they could support me as father. So I found that because I didn't know that they can help me, I just ended up going to charities and going to other organizations that could help me, because that's where I saw the support was. And another thing also I remember while going through proceedings, I was observed within, I had psychiatric assessments where they will observe me in the room, and I never forget every time I used to leave these meetings, I used to wonder to myself, what is it that they are looking for? And I was always perplexed. I was left confused many times. But overall, as the whole situation ended, I did learn a lot. I learned that I could be a caring father who knew how to include somebody if there was issues that I didn't know how to deal with. I didn't know this. I learned this from actually James. I remember when he mentioned mediation. I never heard of mediation in my life. That was the first time I ever came across the word mediation. And through those, assessments that they were doing to me, I started to realize, I learned actually, oh, so that's what I was asking for when things became difficult. And it really empowered me, and it kind of, helped me be more myself and not allow other opinions that people had about me, things like, being controlling and all these, and not being caring. It helped me actually see that actually I was only concerned about my family, and I was only trying to do what was best for my family. So the whole experience, there was blessings after it. Although it was very difficult, there were blessings after it. The other thing I really wanted to point out was family group conference. Fathers have a better voice when they get a family group conference, because when I look back in my circumstances, that was when I was able to, galvanize my support, my family, and they were able to give the views of how they could support me with my son if he was to come into my care. So that was really important, because as fathers, when you're going out looking for help, sometimes it's really hard to know what you need help with, because some of the questions are very complicated. You're trying to answer these questions, trying to come up with solutions for your child, but you don't know, you can't pinpoint exactly where the help can come from. So when I had, I've got 8 aunties. When I had all my aunties come together, individually, I didn't have the pressure of having to beg them for help and ask them, each person, what they could do. It was easier for them to come and just say, this is what I can do for you, and this is what I can do for you. And I was able to have that with my family. There were people who were able to offer me financial support, even little things like food. If I wanted, sometimes they don't like the fact that I'm cooking. They want to cook for me. They want to do things for me. Always, even till now, they still offer me things like that. And I kind of pick and choose when I want it. So I think it's important to recognize that when there's a father attending an FGC, please, as professional, you must ask the right questions too.
Kevin, I'm glad you brought us there to FGC. It'd be nice to hear in a moment from Jordelle to talk about his pioneering peer advocacy work that he's been doing with fathers in Camden. I know by the magic of Zoom, we've got James Owen, your old social worker, that's popped onto the call, Kevin. And James, I guess you will be remembering that family group conference and your work with Kevin as he's talking there. Yeah, you're in a different role now, but it was a while ago, wasn't it? You were Kevin's social worker. Yeah.
It was, but it makes me very proud to sort of hear you talking about your experiences. As you noted, there was loads of difficult ones, but there was obviously some really positive ones there as well. I mean, it's just making me remember how I was feeling. When Mike was saying about the kind of or someone was saying about the armor that you might have, because you are feeling, defensive, not feeling in control of the situation. I think it was making me sort of think about how I felt as a social worker. And I think at times I felt similar, because, there is a lot of conflict, isn't there, in the work. And I remember thinking, I can really picture coming to meet you, Kevin. I think it was maybe at your partner's family's house or something, and making a real effort to, okay, where can I go where you don't feel kind of, anxious, where you might feel more comfortable, but also thinking, but, I do feel a little bit anxious because I'm going to meet someone for the first time. And I think when I'm trying to remember back as to how it worked between us, I think it was because we were both able to talk about how difficult things were, and about kind of being open with each other at the start, and being sort of invitational and being supportive to each other. But I mean, my God, I learned so much from you, being your social worker over that period, and from your family. It's just beautiful to hear your advice to others now. But I mean, I think when I think back, I mean, we took our time as well, didn't we? We didn't rush anything. I worked with you for a good while, spent a lot of time with you and your son. As you say, we brought in your whole family, and we had to, suppose, invest in each other, didn't we? But it was positive to do so.
I'm going to drop it in the chat. This will be a blast from the past for both of you as well, but we've got a little film of you talking about it in a longer format, you working together, which might be interesting for some. Camden have got a film about everything.
Completely forgot about
I'm
that.
going to put that in the chat. Yeah, and James, that was lovely. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Jordelle, yeah, I think people would be really interested in that. In the advocacy work that you've been doing and with dads, actually using your lived experience, but also your professional skills to support fathers that are, you know, in the midst of these issues in the system. Yeah, can you talk a bit about that?
So I've been working closely in conferences like CP conferences, and I'm supporting fathers throughout the process of navigating the social work arena, you know, and it's been really rewarding, not just for the fathers, but just for the outcomes for the families. So I have a couple cases in my mind that I'm thinking about, and especially this individual, you know, he experienced some domestic violence, and he had a couple special needs. He wasn't very good at advocating for himself. He was a man of very few words, but his actions kind of spoke negatively or a little bit obsessive. But you just have to take with a bit of pinch of salt. This is just how he expresses himself, and services would kind of pigeonhole him and kind of categorize him until I started to work with him and like help him communicate exactly what he's trying to express in more of a professional way or a social work friendly way. The outcome changed, and so much so that he became primary care at one stage back for his child. The child was removed back into his care, and he got the child back, and it was just a whole shift in power. And it's rewarding to see like how the power of support, like having that support and someone to be able to speak for you can actually change your outcomes. Because in everything, sometimes it's not the message, it's the messenger. And I found that Camden they're trying to really diversify their practices, especially with like including fathers now, and I'm just going to keep championing it, because I know that dads are an overlooked member of the family, and I really think that it's important to kind of keep them in mind. There's many factors as to why they're overlooked, but for me, like the advocacy now it's really picking up, you know.
And thanks, Jordelle. And with the next topic, the next webinar, Clive Diaz is coming back to talk about his the research that he did with Camden, and actually linking with other local authorities, looking at the impact of peer parental advocacy in local authority settings. So yeah, do come back and join us for that one. Kevin and Jordelle, did you cover, I've been ticking the list off of issues that you sent to me and topics, and I think you've ticked off that list. Is there anything that you burning that you've missed that you wanted to add finally?
Contact. Fathers' contact with their children, it's really important. And I think, I know it's difficult because it means that, you know, the professionals involved have to go to work and they have to work quite a lot around that. I think that's the last thing I would like to pull out, you know, because, you know, there's a law, it's actually illegal, and we need to communicate that correctly, because, and I think as professionals need to do that well, because it's against the law, and we need to be working much better in terms of, you know, helping contact to make sure contact works well for the child. You know, it doesn't have to be a lot, even if it's only 1 hour a week. You know, these things compound for the child, and they do have a significant importance later on in their life. You know, having, for example, just thinking about having how I've had to manage contact, you know, and I see how important it is for my son, you know. So I would say yes, contact for fathers.
Yeah, I would say, just to kind of echo that, is also the identity of the child, you know. I think identity is something so important, and I think by not allowing that relationship to naturally flow or to be whatever it's destined to be, child misses out on a specific part of their identity from their paternal side of the family, aunties, grandmas, cousins, friends, you know, and it's part of the village. So I just wanted to contribute to what you were saying, Kevin.
Last but not least, long life links. That's exactly what Jordelle just pointed out there. So I'm not going to babble on about them, but as
let's drop some information on lifelong links into the chat as well for those that don't know about that, and that's phenomenal. Rich, we've got some time now, haven't we? Thank you so much, Kevin and Jordelle. So we've got a few minutes at the end. I know there's a wide circle of expertise on the call here, and Georgia's coming back in. Are there any questions or comments that people want to make in the wider group for any of the contributors today?
Yeah, so how do you work with dads that are sort of where their immigration status or something, you know, that there's some police involvement, but the social worker isn't engaging them, and they still can be engaged? Or, I mean, how do you manage that?
I understand the question. So for me, it's very simple. They're a person, you know. If you treat them like a person, not a referral, they're a human being, you know. And having that kind of humanistic approach when someone's going through some form of trauma is the best way to build a relationship. Because when you feel like you're isolated and you've got kind of all of these factors that are, for me, fighting against you, the only thing that for me I could maybe seek solace in is someone that is not judging me, has no kind of nothing to gain, just being a person, you know, and understanding that I'm a human and I'm trying to just live life or get the best I can from life. And I think for me, like I do a lot of work with the police as well, on race, religion, and inclusive practices, and this is something in which we kind of like cover sometimes, and they're just people, you know.
Thanks very much. Thanks. Good to see you, Claire. And Anna's got her hand up, and Anna's got a link to Camden. Is doing a piece of work at the moment. And did you want to come in, Anna, and ask you a question? I see on the chat that both Anna and also and Jonathan here, and I can't see the original message, but getting at two sort of binaries. If that's the right way to put it, the fact that you know, working with men should benefit women as well, and vice versa. And also, Anna, I think you wanted to talk about this idea that talking about that fathers as a risk or a resource. Did you want to come in, Anna?
Hi everyone. I could try, but it's a little bit noisy around me.
That's
but
okay.
Yeah,
you go for it. We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, good. Yeah. So I know, Georgia, you talk in your research about going beyond that kind of binary thinking of working with fathers as a risk and as an asset or as a resource. And at the same time, I think sometimes people, when they try to change how we treat fathers, that's the first thing they think about, like we need to treat fathers as a risk, but also as a resource. And so, yeah, I would just be curious to hear from everyone, Kevin, Jordelle as well, and everyone else. What are your thoughts on this? Like, how practically can we also deal with that tension between sometimes fathers being perpetrators, but sometimes this coming from also intertwined with a vulnerability and trauma, and kind of how do we deal with that tension, and how do we move beyond that binary thinking as well in practice?
Rich is nodding as well on that. Jordelle, do you want to come in first? Yeah,
I'll just quickly say, I said how you started that about fathers being seen as a resource, not being seen as a resource. I think that's something that's often happens. I used to do some work before, and we came up with an agenda, like a motto is help us, help her, whereby it was see fathers as a contributor towards the family household, not as a kind of a deconstructor, you know. And I get there has to be safeguards and kind of provision sometimes put in place, but this is the child's identity. So even if this person is the worst person in the world, you know, the child is still made from that person. So there's still some form of affiliation. The relationship will still naturally flow. So what's the best way to manage it? Because deleting it isn't an option, you know?
Just to add on there, I think, yeah, it's really important to see father as a resource. I was very confused in my, experience. I was asked, I had to tell the social workers, I had to put in paper that I cook and clean and wash and don't take my child McDonald's every day. So for me, I was shocked. I never forget how I felt when the social worker said to me, "Oh, this is not common." I was absolutely shocked. And remember, I was a young father. So I was like, what's going on? I didn't know, what she meant by me having to put that down. So I think it's those simple things like, fathers can be involved. And that motto Jordelle's talking about, the one we came up with at Family and Childcare Trust, I actually want to evolve it. I would say it's help me help them, because at that time I thought it was more help me help her, but now it's actually help me help them, because it was about them. It was about trying to understand them.
I think that's a lovely succinct way to bring the session to a close. We always try to stick to the hour and to keep these in the lunch hour, don't we, Rich? And it's been a packed session, lots of learning in there. So grateful to all the contributors for coming, including those on the chat and all of you that have joined. And we really look forward to seeing you at more of these webinars. Yeah, what are you sitting with there, Rich? Have you got a final thought for us? You look reflective.
Yeah. I'm just feeling very grateful to have the opportunity to hear everybody speak today, and blown away by their willingness to come and share their experiences and their generosity in doing that. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's really great to see you all. And the next webinar is on April the 25th. And as I mentioned, it's about peer parental advocacy and child protection work. And Clive Diaz will be circling back round to see us again. So thanks, everybody. Good to see you all.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you very much.